The first sandstorm hit Kalar 7 like an angry giant made of wind and sand. The orange wall of destruction moved across the desert faster than any living thing could run. The sound was terrible, like 1,000 monsters screaming at once. The wind reached speeds that could throw a spaceship into the sky. Sand became tiny bullets that cut through metal, and Stone Hyun-woo had found the weak spot in the giant spear cactus thorns just as the storm arrived. He took a deep breath and pushed through the thin section of spines. The thorns scraped against his skin and clothes. Several broke off and stuck in his arms. The poison burned like fire as it entered his blood. For a few minutes, the human felt very sick. His head spun and his stomach hurt. The poison was trying to kill him, but the human body was amazing at fighting back. His immune system worked fast to understand the toxin and create defenses against it. Soon, the burning feeling stopped, and Hyun-woo began to feel better. Inside, the giant spear cactus was a world that no other being had ever seen. The plant was completely hollow like a living building. The walls were thick enough to block all sound from the storm outside. It was quiet and peaceful, while death raged just outside, the Yao. Inner walls of the cactus were covered with a sweet-smelling pulp that glowed softly in the darkness. Hyun-woo touched it carefully and discovered it was safe to eat. It tasted like honey and fruit mixed together. When he ate some, he felt energy flowing through his body. The cactus was not just shelter. It was food, too. Water dripped down from the ceiling where the plant collected moisture from the air. Even during the terrible storms, the cactus somehow gathered clean, fresh water for anyone. Brave enough to get inside, Hyun-woo realized he had found the perfect survival shelter. Outside, the storm was destroying everything in its path. The crystalline Vorthak learned that their diamond-hard skin had tiny gaps between the crystals. Sand found these gaps and started cutting them from the inside. Their beautiful crystal bodies began to crack like glass. 20 of them activated their emergency beacons in the first hour. The metal-skinned Draknor discovered that their steel bodies conducted electricity perfectly. When lightning struck during the storm, their bodies became like cooking pans. The electricity flowed through their metal skin and cooked them from inside. Most of them had to shut down their systems and hide underground to avoid being killed. The powerful Gornish warriors tried to use their strength to build shelters from rocks and sand. But the wind was stronger than even their mighty muscles. The storm picked up boulders and threw them around like toys. Several warriors were knocked unconscious when flying rocks hit their heads. The gas beings called Whispers thought they could float above the danger, but they learned that wind was their worst enemy. The storm caught them and threw them around like leaves in a hurricane. They could not control where they went, and many were smashed against rocks or buried in sand dunes. Inside his cactus shelter, Hyun-woo was completely safe and comfortable. He explored the hollow interior and made amazing discoveries. The space was large enough for 10 people to live in. The walls were lined with the glowing, nutritious pulp. The ceiling collected water that dripped into natural pools. But the most incredible discovery came when Hyun-woo found a hole in the floor of the cactus. It was just wide enough for a person to crawl through. He followed it down and discovered it connected to tunnels that ran underground. The giant spear. Cacti were not separate plants. They were all connected by a network of tunnels. The human spent hours exploring these underground passages. He found that the tunnel system covered the entire test area. Every cactus was connected to every other cactus by these hidden pathways. A person could travel anywhere on this part of the planet without ever going outside. The monitoring team on the command ship was completely confused. Their sensors showed that the human was still alive and his life signs were strong. But according to their equipment, he was somehow inside solid cactus. The readings made no sense. Captain Dae-ho stared at the displays, trying to understand what was happening. By the end of the first day, 40 candidates had failed the test. Their emergency beacons had activated and rescue ships pulled their unconscious or badly injured bodies from the desert. The survivors were in terrible shape. Most were dehydrated, exhausted, and wounded. The Gornish warriors, who were still active, had learned to work together. They used their big bodies to create windbreaks, protecting smaller species from the worst of the wind. But they were running out of water and food fast. The desert was sucking the life out of them. Several groups of insectoid klaxon were burning through their technology faster than expected. Their shields and air recyclers needed more power than they had brought. The advanced equipment that was supposed to save them was becoming useless. Junk, but Hyunwoo was getting stronger instead of weaker. The cactus pulp was giving him more energy than normal, food. The clean water was keeping him perfectly hydrated. The shelter was letting him rest completely while others fought for their lives, outside. During a brief calm period between storm waves, Hyunwoo emerged from his cactus. The desert looked like a war zone. Sand dunes had moved miles from where they started. Rock formations had been ground to dust. Trees that had somehow grown in protected areas were now gone. Other candidates who saw the human could not believe their eyes. He looked fresh and healthy, like he had just woken up from a good sleep. His clothes were clean. His skin was not burned by sand or sun. He walked across the dangerous desert like he was taking a pleasant stroll. The human began moving from cactus to cactus using the underground tunnel network he had discovered. He was mapping the entire system and learning how it worked. Each cactus had its own special features. Some collected more water, others had sweeter pulp. A few had multiple tunnel connections, but Hyunwoo was not just exploring for his own survival. He had a bigger plan. As he moved through the network, he began leaving small piles of supplies at different locations. He took extra food and water from cacti that had plenty and left it at places where desperate candidates might find it. The monitoring team noticed strange things happening. Candidates who should have died were finding exactly what they needed to survive. Groups that were out of water discovered emergency supplies hidden in caves. Injured beings found medical materials that seemed to appear from nowhere. None of them saw the human directly, but the pattern was clear. Someone was moving through the deadly storm, helping others survive. Captain Dae-ho watched the data with growing amazement. The survival rate was much higher than any previous test. As the second night fell, Hyunwoo returned to his main cactus shelter. He had learned incredible things about the desert planet. The giant spear cacti were not native to Kalar 7. They had been planted there long ago by some ancient species as a survival system for future travelers. The thorns were not meant to kill, but to test. Only beings smart enough and brave enough to figure out how to get past them safely could use the network. The poison was not deadly to species that could adapt quickly. It was designed to keep out those who were not worthy. The human realized that Kalar 7 was not trying to kill the candidates. It was trying to teach them. The desert was a giant classroom, and the giant spear cacti were the textbooks. Most species were too proud or too afraid to learn the lessons. As he settled down for a comfortable night's sleep inside the living shelter, Hyunwoo smiled. The other candidates were fighting against the planet, trying to conquer it or endure it. But he had chosen a different path. He was learning to work with Kalar 7 to understand it and to make it his ally. Outside, the second storm was building. It would be bigger and more dangerous than the first. But inside his cactus home, the human felt perfectly safe. He had food, water, shelter, and a transportation network that covered the whole test area. Tomorrow, he would help more candidates survive and learn even more about the amazing planet that everyone else feared. The second day brought worse storms than anyone had expected. The wind screamed across Kalar 7 with the fury of a dying star. Sand moved like rivers of destruction, cutting new canyons in the desert floor. Lightning turned the purple sky white with electrical fire. The temperature dropped so fast that water froze in seconds, then heated up enough to boil 60 candidates were still alive, but most were barely holding on. The Gornish warriors had lost half their number to flying debris and electrical strikes. The surviving giants huddled together, sharing their remaining water and food. Their mighty strength was useless against the endless assault of wind and sand. The beautiful Vorthak crystal beings were cracking apart piece by piece. The constant bombardment of sand had found every tiny flaw in their diamond bodies. Several had lost entire arms or legs as chunks of crystal broke away. Their musical voices were becoming weaker as their bodies failed. The technological species were facing complete system failures. The Draknor metal beings had overloaded their circuits trying to maintain their shields. Most had to shut down completely to avoid permanent damage. The insectoid Klaxon discovered that sand could get into even the smallest gaps in their equipment. But in the underground network, Hyun Woo was making discoveries that would change everything. The tunnel system was far more complex than he had first thought. The giant spear cacti were connected not just by simple passages, but by a living transportation network with its own intelligence. The tunnels could sense when someone was inside them. The walls would glow brighter to light the way. When Hyun-woo needed to move quickly, the passages would create air currents that helped push him along. When he was tired, the tunnels would widen into comfortable resting chambers. Each cactus in the network had its own personality and special abilities. Some were better at collecting water during storms. Others produced more nutritious pulp. A few had developed the ability to sense the emotional state of visitors and would create calming chemicals in the air. The humans spent hours learning to communicate with the living system. The cacti responded to gentle touches and calm thoughts. They could sense his intentions and would guide him toward whatever he needed. If he was thirsty, they led him to water. If he needed food, they showed him the best pulp. But the most amazing discovery came when Hyun-woo found the memory chambers deep. Inside the largest cacti were special rooms filled with glowing panels. When he touched these panels, images flooded his mind. The cacti were showing him their history. Millions of years ago, an advanced species called the Builders had come to Kalar 7. They saw that the planet would become a testing ground for future civilizations. So they planted the giant spear cacti as a gift for those wise enough to use them. The thorns were not meant to keep people out, but to keep them humble. The Builders had designed the cacti network to teach important lessons about survival. Working together was better than fighting alone. Understanding your environment was better than trying to conquer it. Adaptation was more powerful than technology or natural armor. As Hyun-woo learned these ancient secrets, the other candidates were facing their darkest hour. The second storm was tearing apart their remaining shelters and equipment. Many were beginning to panic as they realized their original plans were completely useless. A group of flying Tyrixians tried to soar above the storm but were caught in electrical discharges. Their wings were burned, and they crashed into sand dunes. Several elegant Savari who had been using camouflage to hide were discovered by the wind and blown miles from their hiding spots. The monitoring team watched in horror as candidate after candidate activated their emergency beacons. The rescue ships worked constantly pulling injured beings from the desert. Captain Dae-ho had never seen failure rates this high in any previous test, but then something unexpected began happening. Candidates who should have died started finding exactly what they needed to survive. A group of Gornish warriors discovered fresh water and food, hidden in a small cave. The supplies appeared to be emergency rations, but no one knew where they came from. 3 injured Savari found medical supplies and bandages placed carefully under a rock overhang. The materials were exactly what they needed, and seemed to have been put there recently, but no one had seen anyone in the area. Several Draknor discovered detailed maps carved into stone showing them how to reach protected areas. The pattern was becoming clear to the monitoring team. Someone was moving through the deadly storms, helping other candidates survive. The life sign readings showed it had to be the human, but the sensors insisted he was still inside. Solid Cactus Hyun-woo was indeed moving through the storms, but not in any way. The monitors could understand. He traveled through the underground tunnel network, emerging from different cacti to leave supplies and assistance. He could cross miles of desert in minutes while staying completely safe. The human had developed a system for helping others survive. He would study the monitoring data that was broadcast to all candidates and identify those in the most danger. Then he would use the tunnel network to reach them and provide exactly what they needed, but helping others was dangerous even with the Cactus network. The thorns still hurt when he passed through them. The poison still made him sick until his body adapted. The tunnels were sometimes flooded or blocked by roots. He had to be very careful not to get lost in the maze of passages. During one rescue mission, Hyun-woo almost got caught outside during a lightning storm. He was trying to reach a group of Klaxon whose technology had completely failed when the tunnel he was using collapsed. He had to dig his way out with his bare hands while electrical fire blazed overhead. The human made it to safety just as massive lightning bolts struck where he had been standing. The Klaxon never saw him, but they found a cache of water and energy bars that saved their lives. They assumed another candidate had left the supplies but never discovered who as the second day ended. The survival rate was much higher than any previous Sandstorm test. Instead of losing 80% of candidates, only 60% had failed. Captain Dae-ho and his team were amazed and confused. The data made no sense according to everything they knew about Kalar 7. The remaining candidates were scattered across the desert in small groups. Most were badly wounded and running, low on supplies. But somehow they were all finding exactly what they needed to continue. The mysterious helper was keeping them alive through the worst test in galactic history. Inside his main cactus shelter, Hyun-woo was planning for the final day. The worst storm was coming tomorrow. The legendary world breaker that could be seen from space was forming on the horizon. It would test everything he had learned about the planet and the Cactus network. The human had discovered that the giant spear cacti were not just a survival system, they were a school. The planet was trying to teach visitors about cooperation, adaptation, and working with nature instead of against it. Most species were too proud to learn these lessons. But Hyun-woo had been a good student. He had learned to listen to the desert, to work with the storms, and to understand that Kalar 7 was not an enemy, but a teacher. The cacti had accepted him as part of their network and were helping him help others. Tomorrow would bring the ultimate test, not just of survival, but of everything the ancient builders had tried to teach. The human settled down for another comfortable night, knowing that he was ready for whatever the world-breaker storm could bring. The real test was not about fighting the desert, but about learning to live with it. The third day began with an ominous silence that made even the bravest candidates nervous. The purple sky had turned almost black, and the air felt heavy with waiting energy. In the distance, a wall of destruction was building that stretched from the ground to the edge of space. The world-breaker storm was coming, and it would be unlike anything any living being had ever seen. Only 23 candidates remained active, and most were in terrible condition. The Gornish warriors were down, too, their last drops of water. The surviving Vorthak had cracks running through their crystal bodies like spider webs. The Draknor had shut down most of their systems to conserve power. The few remaining technological species were running on emergency. Reserves Captain Dae-ho watched the approaching storm through his ship sensors and felt a chill run down his spine. In 200 years of testing, no world breaker had ever been this large. The storm system was so massive it was affecting the weather. On 3 nearby planets, emergency evacuation ships were standing by to extract all candidates as soon as it became clear they could not survive. But deep in the Cactus network, Hyun-woo was not afraid. He had spent the night learning the final secrets, of the ancient builder civilization. The memory chambers had shown him everything about how the giant spear cacti really worked. The plants were not just connected by tunnels, they were a single living organism with one mind. The entire cactus network was like a giant brain spread across the planet. Each plant was like a brain cell connected to all the others by root systems that ran deeper than anyone had imagined. The tunnels were like blood vessels carrying nutrients and information throughout the organism. When Hyunwoo moved through the tunnels, the whole network knew where he was and where he wanted to go. The cacti would rearrange their internal passages to give him the fastest route to his destination. They could sense his emotions and would provide whatever he needed to stay calm and focused. The human had also discovered the true purpose of the Sandstorm test. The ancient builders had not created it to find the strongest or smartest beings. They had created it to find those who could learn to work with nature instead of fighting against it. The cacti network was designed to help anyone wise enough to understand its gifts. As the world-breaker storm approached its outer edges, Hyunwoo began his most ambitious rescue mission. Yet the monitoring data showed him exactly where each surviving candidate was located and what condition they were in. He planned a route through the tunnel network that would let him reach all of them before the worst of the storm arrived. The first group he reached was 3 Gornish warriors who had taken shelter in a shallow cave. Their water had run out and they were slowly dying of thirst. The cave was too far from any cactus for them to reach safety, but Hyunwoo had a solution using the tunnel network. He transported several containers of fresh water and energy-rich cactus pulp to a hidden chamber near their cave. He left detailed directions carved into the rock showing them how to find the supplies. The warriors would think they had discovered a natural water source. Next, he reached a pair of Sci-Fi who were trapped under a fallen boulder. The rock was too heavy for them to move, and they were slowly being buried by blowing sand. Hyunwoo emerged from a nearby cactus and used tools from his pack to dig them out. He worked quickly and quietly, then disappeared back into the plant before they could see him clearly. The Sci-Fi would later report seeing a mysterious figure who helped them escape, but the blowing sand made it impossible to identify their rescuer. All they knew was that someone had risked their own life to save theirs during the most dangerous storm in planetary history. The most difficult rescue involved a group of Draknor whose metal bodies had been struck by lightning. Their circuits were fried, and they could not move without electrocuting themselves. Hyunwoo had to figure out how to help beings made of conductive metal during an electrical storm. The solution came from the cactus network itself. The plants had developed special root chambers that absorbed electrical energy and stored it safely. The human guided the Draknor to one of these natural lightning rods, where they could wait out the storm without being cooked by electricity. As he worked to save the other candidates, Hyunwoo noticed something amazing happening. The cactus network was helping him in ways he had not expected. When he needed to move quickly between distant locations, new tunnel passages would form in minutes. When he needed special tools or supplies, the cacti would produce exactly what he required. The plants were learning from him, just as he was learning from them. They understood his mission to help others survive and were adapting their abilities to assist him. The ancient network was waking up after millions of years of waiting for someone who truly understood its purpose. The world-breaker storm finally reached full strength, and the desert became a vision of apocalypse wind. Speeds reached 300 kilometers per hour. Sand moved like solid walls of destruction. Lightning turned the sky into a constant display of electrical fire. The sound was so loud it could be heard on orbiting spacecraft. Inside their various shelters and hiding places, the surviving candidates huddled together and waited for death. Many activated their emergency beacons voluntarily rather than face the full fury of the storm. But those who had received help from the mysterious rescuer found they had everything they needed to survive. The Gornish warriors rationed their mysteriously discovered water and food. The freed Sivari had found a perfect shelter that protected them from wind and lightning. The Draknor waited safely in their electrical refuge while the storm raged overhead. All of them wondered who had helped them, but none suspected the truth. Captain Deho and his monitoring team watched in amazement as their instruments went crazy. The storm was so powerful it was interfering with their sensors. But through the chaos, they could still track the life signs of the remaining candidates. Most were stable and safe, despite being in the middle of the worst natural disaster in recorded history. The most puzzling readings came from the human Hyunwoo. According to the sensors, he was somehow moving through the storm at impossible speeds. His life sign appeared in multiple locations simultaneously, as if he could be in several places at once. The data suggested he was traveling underground but at depths that should have been solid rock. What the monitors could not see was the truth that would reshape their understanding of survival and cooperation. The human was not fighting the storm or hiding from it. He was working with the entire planet as his partner. The Cactus network had accepted him as part of itself and was helping him help others. As the day progressed, the storm grew even worse, but the survival rate remained surprisingly high. Instead of the usual 90% failure rate, the Sandstorm test was seeing only 60% casualties. The mysterious helper was keeping candidates alive through conditions that should have killed everything on the planet's surface. Deep in the network, Hyunwoo felt the ancient builder civilization watching him through the memory chambers. They had waited millions of years for someone to understand their gift. The giant spear cacti were not just a survival tool. They were a test of wisdom and compassion. The human had passed that test by using the network not just to save himself, but to help others. The ancient builders had designed their system to respond to beings who cared about more than just their own survival. The cacti rewarded cooperation and punished selfishness. As the third day ended and the world-breaker storm began to weaken its fury, Hyunwoo prepared for the final phase of his mission. Tomorrow, the test would officially end and the surviving candidates would be rescued. But first, he had one more lesson to teach them about the true nature of survival on Kalar. 7. The human had learned that the planet was not trying to kill visitors. It was trying to teach them. The sandstorms were not enemies to fight, but forces to understand. And work with the giant spear cacti were not obstacles to avoid, but partners to embrace. Most species approached hostile environments with fear and aggression. They tried to conquer or endure rather than adapt and cooperate. But the human way was different. Hyunwoo had shown that the greatest strength came not from fighting nature, but from learning to live as part of it. Captain Deho walked slowly across the metal floor of the massive space station. His boots made loud sounds with each step. The huge room was filled with beings from every corner of the galaxy. They had all come here for one reason. The Sandstorm test was about to begin. The captain stopped in front of a giant screen that showed a deadly orange planet spinning in space. The planet looked angry even from far away. Sand covered every inch of its surface, and massive storms swirled around it, like hungry monsters. This was Kalar 7, and it was the most dangerous place any living thing could visit. 100 brave beings stood in neat rows waiting to hear about their test. The room was filled with creatures that looked like they came from nightmares and dreams. The tall Gornish warriors stood like living mountains. Their green skin was thick as armor, and their forearms bulged with muscles that could crush steel. Each one carried weapons and supplies that weighed more than a small ship. Next to them floated the strange gas beings called Whispers. They had no solid body, but moved like colorful clouds. Their voices sounded like wind through empty spaces. When they spoke, the air itself seemed to vibrate with power. They believed they could float above any danger the desert planet could throw at them. The crystalline Vorthak stood perfectly still, like living diamonds. Their bodies caught the light and threw it back in beautiful patterns. Each crystal person was worth more money than most planets made in a year. Their diamond skin was harder than the strongest metals known to science. Nothing in the universe could cut through their natural armor, or so they thought. The metal-skinned Draknor checked their equipment. For the 100th time, their bodies were made of living steel that could bend but never break. They had built-in tools and weapons that came out of their arms and legs. When they moved, they sounded like a factory working. Their technology was so advanced, it seemed like magic to other species. Standing between all these powerful beings was one human. Hyunwoo looked small and weak compared to everyone else. He had normal brown skin and black hair that moved when he turned his head. His clothes were simple and plain. The backpack he carried was tiny compared to the mountains of gear everyone else brought. The other candidates whispered among themselves as they looked at the human. Many of them had heard stories about humans, the small, weak-looking species that somehow survived everything the universe threw at them. But seeing Hyunwoo in person made the stories seem impossible. How could something so fragile last even one day in the Sandstorm? Test Captain Daeho raised his hand, and the room became silent. His voice was deep and serious when he spoke. The Sandstorm test has been used for 200 years to find the strongest and smartest beings in the galaxy. Only those who pass can join the Survival Corps, the most elite group of explorers and rescuers in known space. He pointed at the screen showing the angry orange planet. The rules are simple. You have 3 days and 3 nights to survive on Kalar 7 during storm season. The planet will try to kill you in every way possible. The sandstorms move faster than most ships can fly. The sand will cut through your skin like tiny knives. The wind will try to throw you into the sky. The lightning will cook you from the inside. Some of the candidates shifted nervously, but most stood firm. They had trained for years for this moment. The Gornish warriors flexed their muscles. The Vorthak made their crystal bodies shine brighter. The Draknor activated their defensive systems with mechanical sounds. The captain continued. The only things that grow on Kalar 7 are the giant spear cacti. These plants are as tall as buildings and covered in poisonous thorns. One touch from their spines will kill most living things. The thorns contain toxins that no known medicine can cure. Stay away from them if you want to live. Hyunwoo listened carefully to every word, but unlike the others, he seemed more curious than afraid. When the captain mentioned the giant spear cacti, the human leaned forward slightly. His eyes showed interest instead of fear. This caught the attention of some nearby candidates who wondered what the small human was thinking. Your emergency beacons will activate if you are about to die, Captain Daeho explained. Rescue ships will pull you out immediately, but you will fail the test. Once your beacon goes off, there is no second chance. You either survive 3 full days, or you fail. There is no middle ground. The room filled with nervous energy as the reality of the test sank in. 3 days might not sound like much, but 3 days on Kalar 7 was like 3 years anywhere else. The planet had killed thousands of the strongest beings in the galaxy. Only 12 creatures had ever passed the complete test in 200 years. Captain Daeho walked to a control panel and began pressing buttons. The transport system is ready, he announced. You will be scattered randomly across the test area. Each of you will be alone. When you arrive, the first storm will already be forming on the horizon. You will have maybe 1 hour before it hits. Use that time wisely. The Gornish warriors roared their battle cries. The Vorthak hummed in harmony, making beautiful music. The Draknor ran final system checks with beeping and clicking sounds. The whispers swirled faster with excitement. Only Hyunwoo remained quiet and still. The human was thinking about everything he had learned about Kalar 7. Most species saw the planet as an enemy to fight or endure. But Hyunwoo had always been curious about how things worked instead of how to destroy them. The giant spear cacti especially interested him. How did they survive on a planet where nothing else could live? What made them so special? Transport begins in 10 seconds. Captain Daeho called out. The blue light of the transport beam began to glow around each candidate. Good luck to all of you. Remember, the galaxy is watching. May the strongest survive. The light grew brighter and brighter until it was impossible to see anything. Then suddenly every candidate vanished from the space station. They reappeared scattered across the endless orange dunes of Kalar 7. The test had officially begun. Hyunwoo found himself standing on a small hill of sand. The orange ground stretched in every direction. As far as he could see, the purple sky above was starting to turn dark as storm clouds gathered. The air was hot and dry and tasted like metal. In the distance, he could see the other candidates already starting their survival plans. Some were digging holes in the sand. Others were setting up technological shields. Several were building walls out of rocks, but Hyunwoo did something completely different. He started walking toward the nearest giant spear cactus. The massive plant stood like a green tower against the orange landscape. It was easily 30 meters tall and 5 meters wide. Poisonous thorns covered every inch of its surface. Each thorn was as long as his finger and sharp as a needle. Other candidates who saw the human heading toward the deadly plant thought he had gone crazy. The thorns would kill him instantly. But Hyunwoo walked closer and closer, studying the cactus with careful eyes. He was looking for something that everyone else had missed. The storm was coming fast. A wall of sand and wind was racing across the desert toward them. In less than an hour, the real test would begin. Most candidates were already panicking, trying to finish their shelters before the storm arrived, but Hyunwoo stood calmly next to the giant spear cactus, examining its thorns. He moved around the plant, slowly looking at every section. His human eyes were good at seeing small details and patterns. After several minutes, he found what he was looking for. There was one spot near the base of the cactus where the thorns grew differently. They were still poisonous, but they were thinner and spaced further apart. A careful person might be able to push through without getting cut too badly. It would hurt, and the poison would make him sick. But humans were known for surviving things that should kill them. As the first winds of the storm began to blow across the desert, Hyunwoo made his choice. While everyone else prepared to fight against Kalar 7, he decided to try something no one had ever attempted. He was going to work with the planet instead. The third night passed with the world-breaker storm slowly losing its terrible power. The winds that had screamed like dying gods began to whisper. The lightning that had turned night into day flickered and faded. The walls of sand that had moved, like living mountains, settled into new shapes across the desert. As dawn approached, on the final day of testing, and strange quiet fell over. Kalar 712, candidates remained conscious and active, scattered across the orange wasteland in small groups. They had survived 3 days and nights of the worst conditions any planet could throw at living beings. Most were badly injured, dehydrated, and exhausted, but they were alive, and that made them legends. Captain Daeho prepared to end the test and extract the survivors. In the entire history of the Sandstorm test, never had so many beings survived the full 3 days. The previous record was 4 survivors, and that had been set 50 years ago during a much weaker storm season. The data from this test would be studied for generations. The monitoring team ran final checks on their equipment, trying to understand what had happened. The survival rate was impossible according to every computer model they had. The mysterious helper had kept candidates alive through conditions that should have killed them all. The human life sign readings still made no sense, showing movement patterns that defied physics. But as the rescue ships prepared to launch, something unprecedented happened. The human who had been invisible for 3 days suddenly appeared in the open desert for all the sensors to see clearly. Hyunwoo emerged from a giant spear cactus like he was stepping out of his own home. The thorns that should have killed him instantly seemed to bend away from his body. The monitoring team watched in shock as the human walked calmly from cactus to cactus. Each time he approached one of the deadly plants, the thorns would part like a curtain, letting him pass through safely. He moved across the dangerous desert like he owned it, completely comfortable in a place that had nearly killed everyone else. Other candidates who saw the human could not believe their eyes. This small, weak-looking being walked through the poisonous thorns without protection. He emerged from plants that everyone knew were solid and deadly. He carried supplies and moved with the confidence of someone who had never been in danger. The first group Hyunwoo reached was the surviving Gornish warriors. The mighty giants stared in amazement as the human approached them without fear. These warriors, who could crush steel with their bare hands, looked like frightened children compared to the calm human who had somehow mastered the killer planet. We thought. "You are dead?" one of the warriors rumbled in his deep voice. "No one has seen you since the first day. How did you survive? What magic do you possess?" The other Gornish nodded their massive heads, still not believing what they were seeing. Hyunwoo smiled gently and began explaining what he had discovered about the giant spear cacti. "The plants are not trying to kill you," he said in simple words. "They are trying to teach you the thorns test your wisdom, not your strength. If you approach them with understanding instead of fear, they will help you survive." He showed them the weak spots in the thorn patterns that allowed safe entry. He explained how the poison was designed to test adaptability, not cause death. He described the network of tunnels that connected every cactus and the supplies of food and water that waited inside for those brave enough to learn. The warriors listened with growing wonder as the human shared knowledge that could revolutionize survival techniques throughout the galaxy. This small being had not just survived Kalar 7, he had befriended it. He had turned the deadliest planet into his ally and home. Next, Hyunwoo found the remaining Sivari who were hiding in a cluster of rocks. They were elegant beings who normally moved with grace and beauty, but 3 days of hell had left them battered and scared. When they saw the human approaching, they thought they were having hallucinations. "You are the one who saved us, the eldest, Sivari," whispered her voice Philly. Captain Daeho stood before his superiors in the Galactic Testing Council chambers, delivering his report on the most unusual Sandstorm test in history. The 12 survivors had all passed and joined the Survival Corps, but it was the humans' performance that had changed everything they thought they knew about survival. The giant spear cactus network was now being studied by xenobiologists across the galaxy. What they found was remarkable. The cacti weren't native to Kalar 7. They had been planted there millions of years ago by an ancient species as a survival system for future travelers. The poisonous thorns weren't meant to kill, but to test. Only beings with sufficient adaptability and intelligence could figure out how to safely enter the network. Hyunwoo had become something of a celebrity, but he remained humble about his achievement. When interviewed, he explained his philosophy simply. "Other species tried to fight the desert or hide from it. I tried to understand it. The cacti weren't obstacles. They were teachers. The thorns weren't weapons. They were tests. The desert wasn't trying to kill us. It was trying to teach us." The human way, as it came to be known throughout the galaxy, represented a fundamental shift in thinking about survival and exploration. Instead of conquering hostile environments, humans sought to understand and adapt to them. Instead of fighting natural systems, they learned to work with them. Word spread quickly through galactic civilization. The species that looked weakest had proven strongest not through superior technology or natural armor, but through adaptability and wisdom. The human who slept inside a giant cactus had shown that sometimes the greatest strength comes from knowing when not to fight. Years later, the Sandstorm test was changed. New candidates were taught about the Cactus Network and given Hyunwoo's techniques as standard survival doctrine. But something was lost in the teaching. The human way wasn't just about techniques, it was about a mindset that saw cooperation, where others saw only conflict, opportunity where others saw only obstacles. The legend grew with each telling. No one survived the Sandstorm test except the human who slept inside a giant cactus. But those who understood the deeper truth knew that Hyunwoo hadn't just survived. He had transformed what survival meant. He had shown the galaxy that the strongest way to face an impossible challenge wasn't to fight it, but to understand it so completely that it became not an enemy, but a home.